Today's top story, the flavor merger of the century between the Peanut Butter Group and Chocolatey Corp. Joining me is a PBC executive.
Thanks for having me, Barry.
Now, how did you know the merger and the byproduct of it, Jif peanut butter and chocolate flavored spread, would be a success?
You know, it was a gut feeling, a rumbling, if you will. Besides, they're two titans of taste.
Very true. Goes great with pretzels.
And pancakes.
Apples too, I bet. Try Jif PBC today.
As a sports fan, I have to confess. Sometimes the game gets kind of boring. That's when I unfold my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and use multi-window viewing on its large screen. Boring game? I'm checking out my fantasy baseball league at the same time. Score still 1-0? I'm replying to emails in the other window, scoring points with the boss. Semifinals finally getting exciting? I'm buying tickets to the finals and booking my flights. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. It is 2002 in the run-up to a coup against then-President Hugo Chávez, and María, a single mother and housekeeper, finds her young son shot and grievously wounded in the political riots and chaos of that moment. Move back 38 years, and the son of a refugee from the Nazis, Stanislavo, will leave the politics of the classroom for the politics of violent action in the jungles of Venezuela. These two characters' lives will prove to be entwined in the long history of personal and political battles against regimes right and left that deprive the poor and enrich the wealthy, using fear and violence to maintain power. In Alejandro Puyana's potent and propulsive debut novel, Freedom is a Feast, we follow these two characters, their children, and the families of kin and kind into the dark places of Venezuela's past. A novel about the lengths to which ordinary people will go to fight for those they love and those they have never and will never meet. Freedom is a Feast does not turn away from the moral precarity of revolution, nor does it sanctify those at the tip of the spear. Instead, this is a novel that revels in acts of human dignity, even when those actions may conflict with the idealistic visions of revolution. Freedom is a Feast is also an ode to Venezuelans who endure and hold their joy in their culture and communities even after years of colonial and imperial oppression and suppression. Filled with adventure and intrigue, Alejandro Puyana manages a historical novel that thrives on the details of daily lives, loves, and dreams. Alejandro Puyana moved to the United States from Venezuela at the age of 26. In 2022, he completed his MFA at the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas. His work has appeared in Tin House, American Short Fiction, The American Scholar, New England Review, Idaho Review, among others. And his story, The Hands of Dirty Children, was selected by Curtis Sittenfeld for Best American Short Stories of 2020. He lives with his wife and daughter in Austin, Texas. Welcome to Burned by Books, Alejandro Puyana.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for having me and such a beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it.
This is a beautiful, beautiful book. And in a second, I'm going to ask you to just read a little bit from the beginning. But I was wondering if you would comment a bit on the cover, which I find so arresting. And tell me a little bit whether you had any hand in it or what you think of it as a representation of the novel.
There are two covers. There's the hardcover, which is sort of darker with lush jungle, and then there's a yellow cover of the paperback. Which one do you?
I'm looking at the paperback.
Oh, okay, yeah. I love it so much. It. I didn't have much of a hand on in it, to be honest. Sort of the publisher took the reins on it, but I basically didn't have to do any changes to it. I just fell in love with it immediately when they showed it to me. I just think it's really evocative of everything that happens in the book. I love the kind of illustrative, almost protest poster kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, that graphic of it. Yeah, I felt that too. And I felt both Maria and Emiliana in the woman on the cover, which I thought was nice.
Yeah, I think after you read the book, you can go back to the cover and sort of decide for yourself which one of the women it is, and yeah, it's a cover that both invites you into the book, but also when you finish reading it tells a story in itself.
Yeah, I agree. So, Alejandro, will you begin by just reading a little bit right from the beginning of the novel?
Sure. This is in 2002, and it's the morning of the day that Maria's son, Eloy, gets shot. On a normal day, Maria would have walked to the open window, and from the clothesline just beyond it, she would have unclipped the dress, cotton, pink, knee-lengths, with a lacy white apron that began the day clean and accumulated stains as she cooked for the Romeros. She had two other dresses just like it, one mint green and one baby blue, all of them given to her by La Señora when Maria had started cleaning at Casa Verde 4 years ago, the bad year, the year her mother died. For taking the dress from the line, she would have folded it and packed it in her work bag with a bar of Savoy chocolate for a mid-morning snack. But La Señora had called the night before, asking her to stay home. They were going to wait and see what happened with the opposition march first, she said. Señor Romero had heard things were going to get rough. Maria woke up at her regular hour nevertheless, the lacy light just sprawling over the mountain, stretching thin on the zinc roofs of Barrio Copiza. She had lived in the barrios on the west side of Caracas ever since she could remember. First in an apartment building in Katia, when her mom still lived with family, working class but sturdy, made of concrete and iron, with an elevator that wended its way up to the 5th floor, shakily and slowly, and a bus stop right outside the building. When her mom started cleaning at an office building, they'd moved up the mountain to a rented room that was a 5-minute walk from the street through sets of concrete steps. Then, when Maria was a teenager, they made another move further up the mountain and down the poverty line to their first rancho. No more sturdy walls, no more dependable utilities. Her mom was both disappointed and relieved when Maria insisted she needed to work, that school could be something she thought about later. Finally, they got here to the highest part of Cotiza. Her mother, already sick by then, Maria's son, Eloy, already a boy without a father. The burden of work sat heavily and solely on Maria's shoulders. There was no more barrio above them, only mountain. And in this city, none but the poorest lived this high up.
Thank you so much. When I read this the first time, I remembered someone had told me that there are only a couple of cities in the world in which higher elevation denotes poverty. And I know that it's true of some favelas in Brazil, and it appears to be true here in Caracas. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of situation within the city, but also about introducing us to an everyday Venezuelan who its life is more affected by the economic circumstances than it is by this political movement?
Yeah, sure. So Caracas is a city divided by many lines, There's the poverty line, which is the starkest, I think, kind of dividing border in our city. The city sits in a valley with a majestic mountain on the north side of the city called El Ávila, which basically divides the valley of Caracas from the Caribbean. And as the city formed in the valley, its poor people, like happens in most places, got pushed to the margins of the city. And in this case, the margins of the city were the mountain. So as the city grew, the mountains got populated by by shanty towns, by barrios, by favelas, and whatever name you want to use for them. And it is quite a sort of a visual kind of contrast. Wherever you are in the city, you see certain moments where a neighborhood, a middle class, working class neighborhood ends, and there's a highway or a street or a boulevard, and then sort of the barrios start right next to them. So yeah, it's a very stark contrast, and it's right there on plain sight for anybody to see. I think this was, to me, a perfect entry point for the book because you could immediately get situated in that aspect of the city, knowing that we were going to be telling a story where these very stark contrasts exist. And yeah, Maria wasn't always the starting point of the book, but very soon after I started writing it, especially in my first year of my MFA, it became apparent to me that she was going to be where we would start the story.
Yeah. So did you come later to the vacillating structure where you moved back and forth between Stanislavo and Maria and back and forth in time, or was that always the structure?
No, it started with a chronological timeline. So there are 3 eras in the book. There's the 1960s, then there's 2002. Well, actually, there's 4, but it's the 1960s, 1998 when Chavez gets elected, then 2002, which is the coup and where the book starts, and then 2013 when Chavez is dying. And it used to be a chronological book. It started in the 60s and moved forward. But when I was in my first year of my MFA, people were really drawn to this scene that opens the book currently, where Eloy is shot. And I was very kind of confused about if I wanted to move things around. And my professor at the time, Brett Anthony Johnston, was like, look, it's great to start where people are just going to be glued to the page and where they're going to fall in love with a character right away. And I do think you do fall in love with Maria's character in this chapter. And so I just decided to start it there and then see where it would take me, where the rest of the book would take me, and trust that I could take the book apart and then put it back together. And I'm happy that I tried it because I really like the structure of the book today.
Yeah, I do too. I can't imagine it chronologically. I mean, I'm sure I would enjoy it, but I'm wed to the structure as it exists for you. Freedom is a Feast tells the story of multiple generations of Venezuelans, but it's very much the story of Venezuela itself, a country that for much of its history has been oppressed from outside colonial forces and from within. What was most important to you in telling this story of Venezuela?
Yeah, the book started, I didn't know that this is the book that I wanted to write. I didn't know that it was going to be a book that tried to tell the recent history of my country. It started as a response to my brother's kidnapping. He was kidnapped in 2012.
I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, it's okay. He's fine, by the way. He got out of it okay. So I started writing the book with the kidnapping scene that now is in the book, sort of in the last third of the book. And that was the first scene that I wrote a few years after the kidnapping had actually happened. I think I was trying to figure out for myself, kind of dealing with my own feelings around that event, and mostly my feeling of guilt for having left Venezuela when I did, and for my family to have stayed behind. And they were dealing with all this political stuff back there on top of this sort of very traumatic event that happened. So I wrote that scene, and then that scene grew from this young man that had kidnapped my brother. I started thinking about who his family might be, and then that led me to Maria. Mm-hmm. And then once I discovered Maria as a character, I felt like I needed to tell the story of how somebody like Eloy and a family like Maria's would fall into this kind of life of crime. And the only way for me to contextualize that was really to tell the story of how Venezuela had declined for so many decades and the history of inequality and injustice in the country before Chavez and after Chavez. So once I wrote that scene and expanded the book a little bit, I just told myself that maybe this is a much bigger, much more ambitious story that I had to tell. And that led me to the 1960s when the sort of the history of the modern left in Venezuela really starts to explode after the Cuban Revolution was successful.
Hmm.
And that opened the book up to me, made it a lot harder to write,
Yeah, I bet.
made it a real kind of over a decade long project of research and just hard work to try to wrap my head around it.
I'm really interested in how you sort of balanced it, kind of multiple audiences here, because on the one hand, you're living in the U.S., you're writing in English, you've got very likely a primary audience to whom Venezuela is often sort of boiled down to Chavez and maybe Maduro, and maybe not even those two men. And I wonder how you imagined, two different kinds of readers encountering Venezuelan history, perhaps for the first time.
Yeah, that was really, to be honest, Chris, that was my primary, I think, audience that I had in mind. I know there's amazing Venezuelan literature out there, but it's very seldom translated. It usually sticks to Venezuela itself and maybe a little bit in Latin America, maybe a tiny bit in Spain. And I wanted to write a book, not necessarily for other Latin Americans or other Venezuelans, because they know the story very, very well. I wanted to try to tell the story of my country to people that maybe hadn't encountered it before. And this was my attempt at doing that. I mean, I never thought of this book as sort of a history book. I actually, when I started writing it, I even pushed back against the idea of it being historical fiction, although I do think it fits into that category. I just wanted to write about characters that people could fall in love with and show what they cared about and how they lived their lives. And in the process of that, telling the story of my country too. But I think the historic and the political in the book, even though it is there, it's very present at all times. I wanted it to be something that was secondary to the lives of the four characters that we follow here.
As the summer winds down, you're probably thinking about going back to work. I know I am. And when I looked at my home office, I noticed that it needed a refresh. I immediately thought of Wayfair. Wayfair had everything that I needed. And so I went to Wayfair and I bought a desk, a bookcase, and a new office chair. And they're all pretty spiffy. They were quite reasonably priced, and happily, there was no shipping charge at all. They arrived very quickly, and I was able to put them together and put them in my home office, and I can tell you now, it looks great. Of course, that's not the only thing that you can do at Wayfair. You can spruce up your bedroom or your bathroom or the kids' room. You can get kitchen essentials. You can get things for your living room, like seating, rugs, lamps, throw blankets, that kind of thing. Wayfair just has a huge selection of items. Again, all very reasonably priced. Shipping is free, and I guarantee you will be pleased with what you get. So get organized, refreshed, and back to routine for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's wayfair.com, wayfair.com, Wayfair. Every style, every home.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
So Stanislavo is an unlikely revolutionary. He's the son of a Polish doctor who fled the Nazis and a Venezuelan father uninterested in rocking the boat. Stanislavo takes his red hair and freckles into the heart of the resistance. There's a tension between the theory of revolution and the act of revolution. the latter of which may require violence and chaos. How did you want to have Stanislavo embody both of these and the conflict between those two different kinds of revolution?
The first thing I'll say is that Stanislavo is based on a real person, on somebody that I knew and somebody who was a really close friend of my father. His name was Teodoro Pekov. And
this is the dedication. Yes.
Yeah, I dedicate the book to him on the first page. I say, to Teodoro Pekov, whose real story I couldn't tell because no one would have believed it. He lived a mythical life in real life. He was not only a revolutionary and escaped political prison many times over, he ran for president a few times and almost won. He created a progressive left-leaning party that resisted the authoritarian USSR regime at that time to focus on more progressive, more humanitarian way approaching the left. He was close friends with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who donated thousands of dollars to his political party so they could launch a progressive newspaper. And then in the latest part of his life, he founded a newspaper that could battle Chavez's authoritarian bent, but from a place of real intellectual progressive thought. He wasn't a right-wing rich person attacking Chávez on the basis of his ideological leanings. He was somebody that had spent his whole life fighting for equality and justice and was critiquing Chávez's regime for its real faults, not for just, for the headlines of right versus left. So he was I think, a very important person. I had heard many of his stories from himself and from my father, who knew him very well. So he served as kind of a model for Stanislavo. What happens in the book is very different than what happens to Teodoro in real life, but I wanted to keep his spirit intact. And Teodoro was a very idealistic, hardworking, fair man. So I wanted to always respect that part of Stanislavo's character, even if their biography would be very different. So, Stanislavo is an intellectual in the university. He does not agree with what's going on in the country. He is inspired by what happened in Cuba, and he wants to step out of this comfortable life that his parents have made for him. He lost his brother when he was very young, his twin brother, and there is something inside of him that just wants his life to be worth something. So when he gets the opportunity to put his ideology into action, he basically has no choice but to take it. That's the way his character is. And for better or worse, his pride and his sort of intellectual self is also going to get him in trouble throughout the book. Some choices that he's going to make are gonna be the wrong choices, and he's gonna have to deal with that later and try to make things right.
I hope you won't find this a silly comparison to you, but I found a great deal of commonality between Freedom is a Feast and the TV series Andor. In particular, both are concerned not just with imperial evils, but with the moral gray areas that are inhabited by those who wish to foment rebellion. There are several key decision moments at which Stanislavo is forced to choose between what is best for the revolution and what is moral and ethical, although those lines blur even within Stanislavo's imagination. Do you think I'm way off base with this comparison? And how did you want to take on those blurred moral lines when they come from those on the quote-unquote right side?
Oh my gosh, Chris, you just literally made my day or my week or my year with that comparison.
Oh, good. I'm glad you didn't find it.
No, I did not. At first, I'm flattered because I think Andor is one of the best stories that we have in the past few years.
Agreed.
It is such an amazing piece of work, regardless of how you feel about pop culture or Star Wars or whatever. I think it just stands on its own merit as a great piece of writing and production and acting and everything. So I'm just flattered first. But yeah, I think you are exactly right. I think it was really important to me to show that all of these lines that we've been talking about in this interview are very blurry. There's a lot of gray space everywhere. Not only in the revolution, which is just almost by definition blurry, right? Because revolutionaries are always faced with these questions in history, regardless of where the revolution is taking place. There's always moments where you're going to be faced with the question of, do the means justify the ends? Can I break my own personal code if it means progress for my cause? And there is certainly a lot of moments where Stanislavo is put to the test of his ideology and his convictions and his moral fortitude. And sometimes he makes the right decision and sometimes he doesn't. I was, one of the rules that thankfully he never breaks is he never kills anybody. But you could argue that if he would have killed somebody, his life would have turned out a lot better. And maybe the cause would have benefited from it, but he would have lost a big part of himself. But the moral grayness doesn't only lie in these revolutionary moments in the book. It also has to do with the political history of Venezuela. For example, Chavez and Maduro, as well as sort of these larger than life figures, are also blurry. Chavez got into power, I think, because the country needed him there. Venezuela, even though it was considered to be this rich, happy country because of all the oil that we had, and that for years was seen as this kind of beacon of modernity in Latin America, was really an unequal and unjust place where people were struggling, people were very poor, and a ruling class had kind of taken over. And Chavez was a beacon of hope for many to change that. And when he was elected, so many people put his hopes and trust in his promise to change. And one can argue back and forth if his motivations were pure or not. But the truth is that he represented that hope for many people. And as he was in power and things evolved in the country, there's that grayness of what do we do with somebody that can move the passions of people in very legitimate ways, but at the same time is causing harm. And the same injustices that were perpetuated on the country for many years are sort of rearing their heads in this new mode, and when corruption starts to rise and when you see the same things that were happening in the 80s and 90s in Venezuela now being enacted by Chavez and his cronies as they take more kind of authoritarian power of the country, and sort of that idea of sort of power being this corrupter and sort of rotting the core of Chavez's promise. So I really wanted all that grayness and all of that thing to come into the book. So for example, you have Emiliana, Maria's mom, who was a true believer during the revolution, who falls in love with Stanislavo, believes these ideals. And when Chavez comes, she is just so excited that finally somebody like her is going to be in power. While Stanislavo, who lived through these same moments and, was also a part of this revolution, is on the other hand very weary of what Chavez might represent, of the danger that he might pose for the future. So I wanted to show all those colors in the book.
Yeah. So we're introduced to Maria, who is Stanislavo's daughter with Emiliana, when her son Eloy has been shot while moving through the chaos of the coup around Chavez's presidency. she sacrifices everything to sort of bring him back from the precipice of death, fighting for medicine when none is available to her, closing herself off for a long period of time from all but work and care, only to have Eloy make this one sort of idiotic decision, which you referenced before with the kidnapping, and it sends him off into the abyss of the prison system. Then, when institutions fail, it's Maria who will fight for his return. Freedom is a Feast has several male focal characters, but the heart of the novel is women who sacrifice. Can you introduce us to how the women heroes operate within the novel?
Yeah, I think they are both women characters are the kind of heart of the book. I think Stanislavo is so kind of closed in on his mind. He can't always see too far ahead of him. But both Emiliana and Maria are so much clearer in their vision of what's needed. And they're also so much more connected to the true life of the country. Stanislavo, at the end of the day, is privileged and can't really connect with the world in the way Emiliana and Maria can. I love their relationship. Emiliana is this prideful kind of fighter. She's fought her whole life, literally at times. And then she has this daughter who's kind of meek in comparison and guarded. She grew up without a father. Stanislavo never was in her life. So she feels a little out of place, even in the way that she looks, because she has sort of some features that separate her from the rest of the people around her. And the path for Emiliana is to sort of, or what she hopes is that Maria will gain some strength that will carry her forward in life when Emiliana is no longer there. And Maria has to find that strength after Eloy's life becomes in question, after Eloy gets shot, and then certainly after Eloy gets sent to prison. She needs to find her own ways of finding herself and really sort of standing up to other people, including her father, who has been absent for her life, for her whole life. So she needs to find that inner courage to stand up to him and say, "Hey, I'm your daughter. You need to show up for me in this moment when we need you the most." And her path, Maria's path on the book, is certainly, I think, the path of most growth in the book. She really transforms herself. And I'm really kind of proud of her journey in the book.
Hey, it's Paris. I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtuo Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your Virtuo Pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Yeah, as you should be. Eloy and Willie's time in prison is frightening, but also illuminating in the world of the book and Venezuela. The two learn that the prison is run by prisoners who have accrued power through violence and influence. Tortuga and his structures of power, called La Causa, is a microcosm of Venezuela itself. Can you talk about the twinning of this cruel prison and Venezuela's politics of power and violence?
Yeah, I love the way you described it. I always saw it as sort of like this Russian doll kind of thing where the prison is really a smaller version of the country in general. It's run in the same way that Venezuela has been run for decades. through Chavez, through Maduro, but also before that, through the democratic period that we had, and then through the big sort of iron-fisted dictators that preceded it. So it needed to be sort of a smaller doll inside the bigger doll of the country. Yeah, and Eloy and Willie, once they enter the prison, and Willie is Eloy's best friend. They grew up together. Willie is the person that basically convinced Eloy to help him in the kidnapping that eventually made them go to prison. And while they are very different, they are very close. They love each other very much. And when they enter the prison, they need to figure out what the rules are of this new space, which is sort of the rule of most spaces like this, where the big fish preys on the small fish and they need to find their place in it. Willie has an upper hand and he knows the language of violence because he's been a criminal for most of his life. So he understands the dynamics of that space. Eloy, on the other hand, does not. He is completely lost and can only basically survive by being in his friend's shadow and by being next to him. He gets this very strange opportunity because the leader of the prison considers himself this sort of magnanimous person, very egotistically, larger than life person. And he loves art and graffiti, and Eloy has been drawing his whole life. And he manages to convince the leader of the prison that he can paint murals for him. So he finds a little protected space in this dynamic just by being an artist. But in the process, just witnesses what prison life is like in a country where prisons are given basically to prisoners to run for themselves, and all the cruelties and violence that can be enacted in a place like that.
I think it's impossible to read Freedom is a Feast, and especially these sections in the prison, without thinking about the Venezuelans who were sent illegally to a prison death camp in El Salvador. They had come to the U.S. under a protection order that allowed them to stay, fearing they would be killed or tortured if they were sent back to Venezuela. How do you reread your own novel in this darker world of life in the U.S.?
Oh my gosh, it's such a horrifying thing to ponder on. And I have thought about it so much in the last, couple of years. Obviously, when I started writing this book, Venezuelans had already started migrating in frightening numbers all over the world, not only to the US, escaping the terrible poverty in the country, for a while. And I think the worst part of Venezuela's economic crisis, maybe 5-10 years ago, people were starving to death. The economic crisis was such that people were, going to trash heaps to try to find their next meal.
God.
And so people had to leave and had to find a home somewhere else. So I know for a fact that if things were better in Venezuela, so many of us would go back. I think this migration from Venezuela to the outside might be different than some others. And obviously I'm not an expert, but I think that if things got better in Venezuela today, a lot of these immigrants would choose to go back because they miss the country. They wanna live there. So seeing what has happened in the last 2 years, but especially in the last year or so, the way that this government has targeted Venezuelan people, branded them as the worst type of criminals, when I know that that is not true, when I know that the great majority of Venezuelans are here because they have no other choice, and because if they went back, they would be subject not only to the whims of the Venezuelan economy, but also to very real dangers when it has to do with a government oppression. It's heartbreaking and it's so inhumane.
There is a great quote in the novel. Quote, "Life was lived then in a way that only people who have been horribly oppressed can live it, completely, fully, and with a certainty that it cannot last." It reminded me of a powerful Soviet-era quote by a dissident In order to resist autocracy, you must live as though you are free. Both of these interact, I think, powerfully with your title, Freedom is a Feast. How does that idea of living fully as a form of freedom, even in the interim between autocracies, resonate throughout the novel and through your different focal characters?
Yeah, I've always been so amazed by the way people live in the middle of oppression and the way that life still kind of comes through the cracks, you know? I mean, the images of people living their life in war-torn places, especially now in the last couple of years, have been amazing proofs of kind of human resilience. So I'm always both horrified and inspired by the way people find to keep living their life in these moments in history, and are able to find joy and family and companionship while being oppressed and pressed down. So in a way, freedom kind of finds a way to sort of breathe no matter how, no matter where. So I think I wanted to sort of breathe that life into this particular story. And yeah, it's true that the title is evocative of that in the way that you can find moments of feasting, these moments of plenty, even in the worst of circumstances. Like, for example, the first time Willie and Eloy an empanada in the prison the day after they arrive, and that bite of food can still transport them to being in Maria's table eating together, or uh, or the first time that Stanislavo eats after he escapes political prison.
Yeah.
There are moments of true joy, like, for example, and they mostly revolve around food in my narrative. I love to write about food, but
And coffee. Can we talk about how much coffee is important to this book?
yeah. There's a lot of coffee. Stanislao loves him some good coffee in the morning. But yeah, it's these moments of finding connection, finding love and companionship, and during oppression that really interested me. Even though we've been talking about war and oppression and economic despair, this, I think, is a very hopeful book. People do find joy in each other. People have hope that things might change for the better. And that was my ultimately sort of kind of what I hold on to for Venezuela itself. Like, I know that Venezuela is a complicated country. I know people are suffering both inside and outside of the country, but I still am so hopeful that Venezuela will get better soon, that most of us will be able to return, and whether it be for a little bit or forever, kind of reconnect with our home. I haven't been there in over 10 years, or almost 10 years, I should say. I have a daughter that I want, for her to know her father's country. I want my wife to be able to visit Venezuela and see it the way that I saw it all my life. So these are all dreams that every Venezuelan has, and I wanted the book to sort of reflect a sense of hope as well.
Well, I will join you in that hope for that beautiful dream of a Venezuelan future where you and others can return. Alejandro, before I let you go, would you be willing to share some things that you've been reading and loving recently? I know my listeners are always hungry for new recommendations.
Yeah, of course. I feel like I've been reading such great stuff lately. A lot of new stuff, some older stuff. So I'm very happy to do that. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about was another debut novel called Big Chief by John Hickey. He's a Native American writer, and he's writing about this town, this community in an Indian reservation where there's a local election going on. And so it's really political, really about place. And it's about this political operative who's sort of the right-hand man of the person that's running for office, and all the intricacies of a place like a small community in an Indian reservation, how election works, but also how relationships are established between people there. The main relationship between him and the person that's running for office, who's his best friend growing up, it's really complex because there's a lot of political machinations going on, but there's a really deep friendship going on too between these two people. And the main character gets caught in this sort of loyalty versus the right thing to do kind of dynamic. It reminded me actually a lot about the relationship between Eloy and Willie in a way. In my book, I think there's quite a few parallels between our two novels, and it's
Would
just
you
so
say,
full of heart.
would you say that I mean, I feel it feels ridiculous to say that, but I feel like finally space is opening up for indigenous writers in the publishing world. Do you feel like that's happening?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, there've always been such amazing indigenous writers, right? I do think that Tommy Orange's book,
They're
They're
there.
There, kind of opened the floodgates, thankfully, to a lot more voices in that space. Although, of course, like it always happens with quote unquote minority writers, is there's so much more, so many more stories to tell. And I think Big Chief is definitely doing that. Is telling an indigenous story from a perspective that is not necessarily prevalent in literature today. So that is great that we're seeing more works like this, not only
Yeah,
from
I love
indigenous
that.
writers, but from Hispanic writers, from, African American writers and African diaspora writers. So that is exciting to see, but there's so much more work to be done.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so Big Chief, great. I mean, exciting read, propulsive. I loved it. And then as for craft, I just finished reading a book called Literature Class, and it's a Julio Cortázar book, but it wasn't written by him. It's basically a compiled set of lectures that he gave to at Berkeley in the 1980s.
I love
Um,
Cortázar so much. I think he's just like, oh, he should always be rediscovered every day.
Totally. Oh my God. Yeah, same. For me, he was a very impactful writer because I feel like I read him for the first time right after high school, beginning of college, and I read his short fiction before I even like read Borges. I had read Gabriel Garcia Marquez when I was in high school, but I hadn't really read short stories in that way. And when I encountered Julio Cortázar's short stories, it kind of exploded my brain in a way. I
Me
didn't know
too.
that. Yeah, yeah.
And then I read Hopscotch, and I was like, literature's allowed to do this?
Right. That's the thing with Cortázar, and I'm sure people that encounter, Borges or other people before Cortázar feel the same way. I mean, they were such out of the box thinkers when it came to literature, and they were able to move the pieces of literature in really exciting ways with time or with place. They were able to kind of scramble things in a really interesting way. But anyway, this book, Literature Class, which is both in English and in Spanish, you can find them in both languages. It is literally a masterclass from this person at the end of his life, having lived through decades of literature, and also at a stage of his life where he had turned immensely political. He was after the Cuban Revolution, he got so involved with independence movements in Latin America, with anti capitalist and anti colonialist movements in Latin America. So he was bringing all this not only wealth of knowledge in terms of craft, but also in how writers had a responsibility to turn themselves political in their work. So it is a great piece for our time, for people that are interested in writing about what's happening.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm so going to get it, and it seems like something I could teach as well.
Oh, totally. I mean, partly, to be honest, I wanted to read it because I'm going to be teaching a few things and I'm coaching a few younger writers. And I wanted as part to kind of nurture that side of me. And it's helped immensely. So yeah, highly recommend it for that.
That's amazing.
And then the last book I'll talk about is Time of White Horses by the Palestinian writer Ibrahim Nasrallah. This is a writer and really a piece of like a world of literature that I haven't, jumped in yet. So this was just a magnificent discovery for me. I mean, he's a very important writer, and many people will know him right off the bat. So he's a huge luminary. It's just I wasn't aware of him. But Time of White Horses takes place when Palestine is beginning to be occupied at the beginning of the 20th century, and the British and are kind of coming in and trying to take hold of this region. And it's a multi-generational story about this family that has always lived here in this town, and they're trying to combat what's coming. And it reminded me a lot of 100 Years of Solitude, actually. It kind of walks the line between magical realism and realism. It's not as open into that style as 100 Years of Solitude is, but it does have that feeling. There's this one town, which is really the heart of the book, and this family that's trying to protect it at all costs. And it's really epic in scope, but propulsively written. It's beautiful, and the way that it treats animals. I don't know about you, Chris, but like I love when a book is able to capture animals in a very special way.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the horses in this book are just written in a way that just blows your socks off, and there are these beautiful symbolic animals. Yeah, I loved it. It was really a book to dive into. It's big, it's meaty, and I love when you can kind of just fall into a book in that way, and length doesn't matter anymore, and you're just kind of steeped in the world.
Well, these are amazing recommendations. I'm going to get them all. And I really, really want to recommend Alejandro Puyana's Freedom is a Feast. It is just, with your permission, Alejandro, I will say that if you love Andor, that this is a way to engage with the rich and just sort of deep and complex history of Venezuela as a place of revolution and of seeking freedom in all of its forms, with beautifully drawn characters. And I just can't recommend it enough. And I hope that you'll run out to your local indie and get Freedom is a Feast. And thank you so much for talking with me, Alejandro.
Thank you, Chris. And I will take that Andor comparison all the way to the bank 7 days a week. I will keep talking to anybody that listens that, one time this person compared my work to Andor.
Well, I like that it's me. So, and I'll be looking forward to whatever you write next, and I hope we'll get to talk again.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Alejandro Puyana for coming on to talk about his novel, Freedom is a Feast. You can find links to purchase Freedom is a Feast and all of Alejandro's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, and now YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.